Dear friends, English literature, romantic poetry, selected poems of Percy B. Shelley, Adonais, brief questions with answers. Brief questions 114 to 160. Question 114. How does grief return to the poet? Answer. Grief returns to the poet with the revolving year. Question 115. What elements of nature participate joyfully in the spring? Answer. Airs, streams, ants, bees, swallows, birds, lizards, and snakes participate joyfully in spring. Question 116. What do amorous birds do in spring? Answer. Amorous birds build their nests in spring. Question 117. What do green lizard and golden snake do in the spring? Answer. They awake out of their trance in spring, that is, return to their active life after their full sleep in winter. Question 118. What has been refreshed by the quickening air? Answer. Wood, stream, field, ocean, and sky have been refreshed by the quickening air. Question 119. What are the lamps of heaven? Answer. The sun, the moon, and the stars are the lamps of heaven. Question 120. What are the baser things? Answer. The baser things refer to lower animals, insects, worms, etc. Question 121. What is leprosy? Answer. Leprosy is a disease that causes tissues to rot. Question 122. How does Shelley describe the process of decay? Answer. He says that no material objects of the earth is completely destroyed. It transforms itself and exists at all times in different forms. Question 123. How does a dead body transform into fragrant flowers? Answer. By the law of nature, the dead body is transformed into fertilizing power, which serves to feed the plants on which bloom sweet-smelling flowers. Question 124. To what does Shelley compare the soul and the body? Answer. He compares the soul to a sword and the body to a scabbard. Question 125. How is grief mortal? Answer. Grief is mortal in the sense that it ends with the death of the person who feels grief over the death of someone. Question 126. How are the higher and lower creatures made one? Answer. The higher and the lower creatures are made one in death. Question 127. What is compared to a moneylender? Answer. Death is compared to a moneylender. Question 128. Why is life called a borrower? Answer. Life is called a borrower because it borrows from death what requires for earthly existence. Question 129. Who is misery? Answer. Misery is the personified figure of Shelley's own grief. Question 130. Who is called the childless mother? Answer. Urania is called the childless mother. Question 131. Why is Urania called the childless mother? Answer. Urania is called the childless mother because she had become childless with the death of her youngest son, Adonais, that is kids. Question 132. What does misery call upon Urania? Answer. Misery calls upon Urania to come and weep over her great loss, the death of Adonais' kids. Question 133. Why did Urania rise like an autumnal night? Answer. Urania rose like an autumnal night as he was called upon to come and weep over the death of her son by misery and her attendants' dreams and echoes. Question 134. Why does Shelley describe the day as moving around the earth on eternal wings? Answer. Shelley describes the day this way because it never fails to return in the morning. It is eternal. Question 135. What is Urania afraid of? Answer. She is afraid of her lonely life because of the death of her dearest son. Question 136. Why is Urania compared to an autumnal night? Answer. Urania is compared to a misty, windy night in autumn. An autumnal night is surrounded by stormy winds, thick gloom, and cold mists. Similarly, Urania is surrounded by sorrow and fear. Question 137. What is Urania's secret paradise? Answer. It is her sacred abode, ethereal region of love, peace, and joy. Question 138. Why does Urania fly from her secret paradise? Answer. Her grief over the death of her son was so great that she flies from her secret paradise. Question 139. What do stone and steel refer to in Adonis? Answer. Stone and steel metaphorically refer to malice, wickedness, and a lack of sympathy of human hearts. Question 140. What do barbed tongues and thoughts refer to in Adonis? Answer. Barbed tongues and thoughts refer to sharp criticism. Question 141. Why does Shelley say that the public is underserving of Keats' poetry? Answer. Because of their lack of reaction, Shelley says the public is undeserving of deserving of Keats. I repeat the question, please. I'm sorry. The question was, why does Shelley say that the public is undeserving of Keats' poetry? Answer. Because of the lack of reaction, Shelley says the public is undeserving of Keats' eternal flowers or his beautiful eternal poetry. Question 142. What are eternal flowers? Answer. Eternal flowers refers to the eternal poetry of Keats. Question 143. Why is Death ashamed by the presence of Urania? Answer. Death is ashamed by the presence of Urania because of his ugly ways of taking the life of her son. Question 144. Why does Death blush to annihilation? Answer. Death is so embarrassed by the presence of Urania that he blushes himself to annihilation. Question 145. Why is Death made powerless for a moment? Answer. Death is made powerless for a moment by the presence of Urania. Question 146. What does Urania request her son when his dead lips became animated? Answer. She begs him not to leave her again in the comfortless world. Question 147. What does Urania beg Adonis, Keats? Answer. She begs Adonis for a kiss and for a word from him. Question 148. Why does Urania ask for a kiss and a word from Adonis? Answer. Urania asks for a kiss and a word from Adonis so that she may preserve them as a treasure to herself. Question 149. What is meant by Urania's heartless breast? Answer. It means her broken-hearted breast. Question 150. Who is chained to time in Adonis? Answer. Urania is chained to time. Question 151. What is meant by chained to time? Answer. It means immortality. Question 152. Why can't Urania die with Keats? Answer. As Urania is immortal, she cannot die with Keats. Question 153. What are the prudent paths of men? Answer. The prudent paths of men are the accepted traditions of poetry to write something fresh and original. Question 154. Who is referred to as unpastured dragon? Answer. The unpastured dragon refers to the critic who is responsible for Keats' death. Question 155. Wisdom, the mirror shield, to scorn the spear. What is alluded to here? Answer. The allusion is to Perseus, a Greek hero who was given a shield by Pallas, goddess of wisdom. He had cut off Medusa's head, avoiding the direct sight of her by looking only at her reflection in his shield. Question 156. Why does Shelley think Keats is defenseless against the critics? Answer. He says that Keats was defenseless against the critics as he didn't have wisdom to act as a shield or scorn to return their criticism. Question 157. How, according to Shelley, would Keats have overcome the critics? Answer. Shelley thinks that Keats should have waited the full cycle before releasing his work to the public. Basically, he feels that Keats should have matured a little so that he could have handled criticism better. If he had waited, he would have made these critics free like deer from him. Question 158. What does Shelley call the Troy reviewers? Answer. Shelley calls the Troy reviewers hardened wolves, obscene ravens, and vultures. Question 159. How is Byron different from Keats? Answer: Byron was not so weak and timid as Keats was. Question 160. Which poem of Byron was criticized by the Scotch reviewers? Answer: once the critics of the Edinburgh Review severely criticized Byron's first volume of poems, Hours in Idleness. Thank you friends for watching my video.